Hello, everyone. Welcome to VLGA Connect, brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our weekly show where we look at the latest news from around the Victorian local government sector. And I'm joined by special guests to talk about current issues of interest. We have a pretty bumper issue for our last edition of the year. Coming up, Tony Raunic very shortly from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. He'll help us unpack three recent arbiter reports. That's right, three reports, and he'll share his takeaway for the sector. Kathryn Arndt will join Tony and me to look back at the year in Victorian local government and to look ahead at what's in store for next year. Plus, we'll complete our Meet the VLGA board series when I catch up with independent member Mike Blake about his, quite frankly, fascinating journey from Africa to the Australian public sector. But first, it's time for the last of our Connect News headlines for this year. The arbitration outcome of complaints lodged against Whittlesea councillor Aidan McClendon was tabled at the council's meeting this week. Arbiter J.A. Silver dismissed most of the allegations made, but found two to be proven and determined that Councillor McClendon had engaged in misconduct on those matters. Mornington Peninsula Shire Mayor Councillor Anthony Marsh has been cleared of misconduct. The same arbiter, Joel Silver, ruled that Councillor Marsh acted within his powers when blocking three councillor motions in June that sought to revisit previous council decisions. More on those matters with Tony Raunic shortly. The final report of municipal monitors assigned to Darebin City Council has been released this week. June Anstey and Ross Millard were appointed to serve between April last year and June this year in response to governance and councillor conduct issues raised with the minister. They've made 16 recommendations for the council, including many outstanding from a previous 2023 monitors report. And there's one recommendation for the local government minister about how notices of motion could be treated in the model governance rules which are in development. Another Victorian mayor has stepped aside from their role, the second to do so since being elected last month. Cardinia Shire Council Mayor, Councillor Brett Owen, has been granted a leave of absence due to work requirements. Deputy Mayor Councillor Liz Roberts has assumed mayoral duties. The leave was approved at this week's council meeting and the arrangement will be reviewed in February if needed. At Alpine Shire, take two of their mayoral election has happened after the resignation of Councillor Gareth Graham from the role 10 days after taking on the position. This year's deputy and last year's mayor, Councillor Sarah Nicholas, has regained the mayoralty for another term. Some council CEO news this week. Brimbank Council has unanimously extended CEO Fiona Blair's contract for another 5 years, while at Murrindindi Shire, CEO Livia Benazzi has been offered a new 5-year deal to follow on from her current 5-year contract, which expires next June. And at Baw Shire, another acting CEO has been appointed, while CEO Tilla Bouden undergoes treatment for breast cancer. Sally Jones, recently the interim CEO at Central Goldfields, will step into the role at Baw on the 6th of January through the 3rd of February. She's taking over from Mick Cummins, who's led the council team in recent weeks. The South West Victoria Alliance has elected a new leadership team. Councillor Dennis Heslin from Southern Grampians will be the chair, taking over from Warrnambool Mayor Ben Blaine. Corangamite Mayor Kate Macon will serve as deputy chair. Councillor Blaine has been elected chair of Regional Cities Victoria, the alliance that represents Victoria's 10 largest regional cities. Wodonga's Mayor Councillor Michael Goebel is deputy chair. Whittlesea Council and Mayor Laurie Cox have taken on chair duties for the Northern Councils Alliance. Mitchell Council and its Mayor John Dougal will take on the deputy chair role. And Colac Otway Mayor Councillor Jason Schramm and Greater Geelong Mayor Councillor Stretch Contel OAM have been elected chair and deputy chair respectively of the G21 Alliance, which represents the collective interests of Greater Geelong, Surf Coast, Colac Otway, Golden Plains and Queenscliff councils. In other news, the Herald Sun reported this week that Mornington Peninsula Council is fast-tracking a review of mapping errors in new landslide risk planning controls after receiving a flood of complaints from property owners. And it's the end of an era in Brimbank. An emergency demolition order has been placed on the former council office building in Alexandra Avenue Sunshine after structural assessments confirmed the building is unsafe and poses a risk of structural failure that could endanger human life. That's the latest from VLGA Connect News. Keep up to date with news from around Victoria and across the country on the Local Government News Roundup podcast, which is now in its summer series mode. You can check out those episodes on your podcast player. They're brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association. Well, we cannot wrap up the year without bringing in Tony Raunic from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers just to tie a bow on a few monitors or arbiters reports actually that have occurred just recently. Tony, good to see you. Welcome back.
Thanks, Chris. What a year, and it's flown by, hasn't it?
It has indeed. I hope you're going to manage to take a bit of time off
Oh,
soon.
absolutely. It's an essential. And Tony closes the door of the office on Friday, this coming Friday afternoon, and yeah, back in early Jan, but looking forward to that break.
Excellent. Kathryn Arndt is going to join us shortly when we'll do a little bit of a look back over the year and perhaps a bit of crystal ball gazing about next year. But we have had a few sorry, I keep saying monitor, I mean arbiter reports and findings that have come out in recent weeks that are worth talking about for key takeaways. One this very week at Whittlesea, relating to Councillor McClendon there, who of course was suspended for 6 months or so from the mayoral position while the commission of inquiry was conducted. So Tony, this was a matter that was on foot before that suspension happened, and then of course it was in abeyance until all of that played out, wasn't it?
That's right. So Joel Silver was the arbiter, I think a former councillor himself, Joel. But and yeah, those reasons were handed down on the 8th of December. But the majority of the allegations against Mr. McClendon were dismissed, or Councillor McClendon were dismissed. But the arbiter did find that certain public statements by Councillor McClendon during his period of leave of absence, which is a really interesting thing, during the leave of absence period, in January of this year, while he was campaigning for that Werribee state by-election that he was a candidate in, those comments amounted to misconduct. So in particular, there was this interview that was held on Sky News on Australia Day, the 26th of Jan of this year, where Councillor McClendon, while on leave of absence, made a statement in relation to the way councils work and referred to his own council, Whittlesea, and said about councillors, they've only got just enough time to read what's put in front of them on a Tuesday night, full council, and rubber stamping. That's not good enough. It needs an overhaul. And what the arbiter found was that despite Councillor McClendon having been on leave of absence at the time those comments were made, because the comments were concerned with his role as a councillor, they were made, they were made in the performance of that role, and therefore were caught by the Model Councillor Code of Conduct. And a reasonable interpretation of those comments that I just read out would be that, in Councillor McClendon's experience, the staff at Whittlesea City Council weren't giving councillors sufficient time to consider matters before they, had to make decisions, and that tended to diminish the public's trust and confidence in councils generally, and in his council, the city of Whittlesea. And so he's been ordered to make an apology at the next council meeting. And interestingly, quite extensive training, Chris. I don't know if you saw this, but
I did. A lot about time management skills.
Yes,
With the arbiter saying, well, if you can't manage your papers, perhaps you need a bit of help in that respect.
Yeah, 5 hours of training at least. And, the trainer to provide a written report to the mayor, detailing progress, areas for improvement, recommendations for further assistance, and also that Councillor McClendon be ineligible to hold office either as mayor or deputy mayor for a period of 12 months since the arbiter's reasons were handed down.
Yeah.
So I think important for the sector is that you might, and this is important for November 26, a state election coming up, and some councillors may be considering running and taking leave of absence. But the decision stands that if a councillor, while on leave of absence, makes comments that relate to their role as a councillor, then they can still be regarded as performing their role of councillor at the time and therefore be caught by the Model Councillor Code of Conduct, which only captures a councillor's commentary, actions, behaviours in performing the role of a councillor. So I
Yeah.
think we probably thought sometimes, oh well, while I'm on leave of absence, it's it's free reign. I can comment on anything, and I'm not subject to that Model Councillor Code of Conduct. And if anyone thought that, then this decision certainly it puts up an alternative view to that.
We've often talked about, haven't we, that once you're elected to the role, you wear that hat. It's very
Mm.
difficult to take that hat off and then act
Mm.
accordingly. That like you're not a councillor. So, Tony, am I understanding this correctly? That there is a grey area here where it's beyond the power of the council to impose anything in relation to those activities at other levels of government, and I'm hearing that the inspectorate takes a similar view.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's right. So I think that of course councils often have these election period policies. Indeed, it's a part of the governance rules typically, and they
Mm.
deal with how councillors as candidates for a council election can use the resources given to them by the council, and so they are prevented from using council resources to advantage them in their council election campaign, and rightly so. But many of these policies go that step further, as you say, and seek to limit how a councillor conducts themselves in relation to election to another level of office, be it to the state parliament or the Commonwealth Parliament. And yeah, these comments would suggest that those in attempts to um, perhaps place some limitations on councillors in that respect might not be effective.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. As you say, one to note as we head into a state election year, I did watch the end of the Whittlesea Council meeting this week and heard Councillor McClendon make that apology exactly as written in the Arbiter's outcome report. So let's hope that puts a line under that for now.
Mm,
Tony, Kathryn's going to join us in just a moment. There are
mm,
two other matters out there that we
mm,
haven't had time to talk about. One at
mm,
Merrybeck, where there was
mm.
an internal arbitration between Councillor Oscar Yildiz and Councillor Adam Pulford about remarks that were made during debate on an agenda item. Perhaps if we can just get a key takeaway from that one.
Yeah, yeah. So Councillor Pulford was found guilty of misconduct for those comments made in debate at a council meeting, um, and the problem was that the comments were became a personal criticism of his colleague's motivations. So it said that
Right.
was saying that Councillor Yildiz's opposition to some rainbow crossings being installed in the city of Yarra was suggested, was an indicator of some duplicitousness in his approach in relation to LGBTQIA plus issues. And so the takeaway is councils should take great care to avoid, personal criticism of colleagues, their motivations, their trustworthiness, their truthfulness, both in debate and in subsequent commentary, and asserting a shameful or wicked
Mm,
motivation for a councillor voting against, say in this case, a capital works decision, where there's no clear evidence of that, that was the reason for the councillor taking that position, would be misconduct. And so in
right.
this case,
Okay. Mm.
Councillor Yildiz's opposition to the rainbow crossings being put into the budget was, I think these rainbow crossings will be too expensive. $45,000 isn't good value, and asserting some other motivation was inappropriate. And Councillor Pulford's
Right.
been found guilty of misconduct.
And the last one, just quickly, was at Mornington Peninsula, where some councillors took issue with the mayor's actions in ruling some motions out of order. They challenged his right to do so. The arbiter was pretty clear in his finding here,
Yeah,
wasn't
so Joel Silver again, he's had a busy month, and this decision on the 1st of December was that it's about notices of rescission, or sometimes called notices of revocation, as they're called at
Yeah.
Mornington Peninsula Shire. But there's a standard provision in governance rules that says, if you're going to put in a notice of rescission, it has to follow a particular process. Well, this decision stands for one can't avoid using language like notice of rescission in your motion, but then just put in a motion that effectively reverses the position. And that's what was occurring at Mornington. So there were decisions to, discontinue a climate emergency declaration, and that was the earlier decision. And the notice of motion, which the mayor refused to allow under the governance rules, sought to introduce a report to council in terms of introducing a climate change emergency declaration. So it was doing
Right.
the reverse, was effectively a notice of revocation or a notice of rescission, and would have had to comply with the governance rules. And it was quite okay, therefore, for the mayor to rule it out of order, treating it as though it was a notice of revocation or rescission.
Okay, some interesting findings there that governance tragics will no doubt be poring over and finding of interest. Thanks, Tony. Keeping you busy there, a few decisions to read. I wonder what we'll have in store for us next year, and that's where we're going to go shortly with a look towards what's happening in the sector in 2026. On that note, it's time to have a look back at the year and do some crystal ball gazing into next year. And who better to join Tony and I for that conversation than the CEO of the VLGA, Kathryn Arndt. It's been a while, but Kathryn, it's great to have you back on
Oh, look,
VLGA
Chris,
Connect.
thank you. It's just a pleasure to be able to wrap up the year with you and Tony. After listening to your conversations all year, I just hope that I have something as interesting to contribute.
You always do. And of course, it's been a big year for the VLGA, Kathryn. You've had the second CIS. You've just very recently delivered the very successful Mary Rogers Awards and been involved in upskilling councillors all around the state. How do you look back on the year? I imagine it's with a sense of pride and satisfaction, I hope.
Oh, look, I hope so. And I really do, hope that the councils that we've worked with throughout this first term of council have seen the value in the work that we do, particularly, the extensive councillor professional development training program that we've rolled out. We've mapped that out across, of course, the full term of council, but this year was year one. Very delighted that Tony Raunic is part of our faculty of facilitators for that. But I mean, we started sort of the year finishing off the mandatory induction training for councillors. We then, of course, had mayoral elections. We've, launched and celebrated the inaugural Mary Rogers Award recently in Parliament House, which was a great honour for the VLGA to be a part of that and remember Mary Rogers, who was of course, the first woman councillor elected at Richmond City Council at that time, I think in 1920, if I've recalled that correctly. And we look very much forward to rolling those awards out annually. And probably introducing also a regional council category to the Gender Equality Award for the council category, I should say. A lot happening, an incredible amount happening.
Absolutely. And Tony, when you look back on the year, I know we've talked a bit about arbiters' reports and outcomes, etc. What do you think was the most significant thing that happened this year?
Oh, I think a number. Firstly, I think a new minister has a big impact on the sector. And believe it or not, Christmas Eve last year was Nick Stakos was appointed local government minister, and he's
crazy.
coming up to a year in
crazy.
that role. Yep.
To
And I think he's
think
proved
that is
to
nearly
be
12
quite,
months.
like fairly, interventionist, like willing to step in and appoint municipal monitors, commission of inquiry in at least one council, and so I think we might have seen more of that perhaps in 2025 than we might have anticipated. But in terms of highlights, I think that certainly there are a number of occasions where the sector and the various councils, representative organisations really got together, and the Emergency Services Volunteer Fund levy campaign was was one of them. And for my mind, what's really interesting is how effective the sector was when they got together. And there was that temporary reprieve announced in May, where it wasn't to the fees weren't to increase for primary producers for a period, and then only this month in December the Treasurer has announced a freeze on the levy until at least 1 July 2027, and that those volunteer organisations, the threshold for them would be doubled from 5 million to 10 million before the levy comes in. And I think that is largely as a result of a really concerted, coordinated campaign across the sector to inform government, what it meant for our population, and for councils having to be the bad guys having to collect this levy, and that they then go off and remit. So shows how effective we can be when we work together.
Yeah, look, if I can just jump in there, we shouldn't underestimate just how the impact or the collective impact or the value of collective impact can have, as you've just said, Tony. And certainly from the VLGA's perspective, everything we do and we hope to do in collaboration and partnership, because we're stronger together. And I think that's an excellent example of that.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you that very point, Kathryn. I think it is a great example. It's not always the case, is it, that the sector gets its way? And in this case, it's a significant win as we lead into a state election year. And I imagine you would agree that advocacy is going to be very important for councils, big and small, next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think next year will be a slightly different election year than previous. And there's an opportunity here for the sector to really work together and use the power of that collective impact to influence some of the outcomes there, or certainly some of the policy outcomes. The local government sector, unfortunately, as a result, I think of, just the state of the budget. We've seen the outcomes of the Silver Review tabled recently, and the local government department, or local government Victoria, appears to be dwindling before our eyes, or certainly not as visible as it has been in the past. So what that does is also present an opportunity for the peak bodies like the VLGA, LG Pro, MAV, to work together to ensure that the sector's being supported and advocated for as it should be.
Yeah, a good message. Civility, or the lack thereof. Tony and Kathryn here. Tony, that's a strong theme to come out of a lot of these arbiters' reports and monitors' reports. Do we see that being front and center still in 2026?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. So we've had a year now of those more onerous sanctions in relation to model councillor code of conduct, and I think we're starting to see, I think in decisions, more of this, rather than just an apology, more of this suspension stuff flowing through. But I'll be curious to see, where that goes in 2026. Also, will we see model governance rules introduced or not? And if we do, that will also have an interesting impact on the way some of our council meetings operate. Perhaps.
And Tony, just on that, and I know Kathryn will want to say something about the civility side of things, but just on the model governance rules, one of the hot questions at the moment is, will they be mandatory, do we think? Is there an appetite to impose them on councils?
Well, and that's the big question, isn't it? And I think perhaps I think that there is some value in having some standard rules, because we like to we like to hear the interpretations at another council and know that it applies to us at our council. And if our rules are slightly different, then it might not. So I see some value in having a standardisation.
And if I could just jump in there too, that's certainly what we're hearing the sector wants as well. The majority of the sector, and certainly, I sit around that steering committee that's overseeing the implementation of some of those Sandon reforms or governance reforms. There is a strong desire from those around the table, sector leaders, for standardised mandatory governance rules.
Yeah. Okay, and of course, we're seeing play out in New South Wales at the moment the imposition of standard code of conducts for meeting procedures, which is going to be an interesting one to watch if you have an eye over the border over the next few months. Kathryn, just back to civility briefly, because I know you think strongly enough about this as an issue right now to make it the topic for fast track coming up in early in the new year.
Yeah, look, Chris, I mean, we've just seen in recent days just, what happens when there isn't that respect, there's that intolerance, there's that lack of civility, that incivility, and the impact it has on our communities. We've seen it at the local government level, we've seen it at other levels of government, and it's a global issue, incivility. We ran an excellent panel earlier in the year, Chris, which you were a part of also, a global incivility live panel. We have now broadened our annual fast track program. It's a national program now. And we've already been inundated with registrations. So 27th of February, everyone,
Excellent.
early bird discounts apply until the 31st of December. We're running a national program looking at incivility and its threat to local democracy.
Excellent. Nice plug. Good to hear that there's already strong interest and that early bird opportunity is still there. One of the things that has been exercising my mind recently that I'm keen to get both your thoughts on, and it sort of ties into the training and the preparation of candidates and then successful councillors. We've seen a mayor step aside after less than 10 days because they've realised the extent of the role and they've said to their credit, this is Gareth Graham at Alpine Shire, perhaps I'm not the right person for the role at this time. We've seen another mayor just this week step aside on a leave of absence for a period that we don't know how long yet due to work commitments. Police officer, this is Brett Owen at Cardinia Shire. Is there an emerging issue here about the expectations on people who take on these roles and whether they're being adequately prepared?
I don't think this is a new issue, Chris. We've talked about it, haven't we, over the recent years? It is such an important role, the role of mayor, and there still appears to be a lack of understanding amongst some councillors about just exactly what that entails. And I think when a councillor does self-select out of the role because they've developed a better understanding of the responsibilities, that's not necessarily a bad outcome. But I think what it does demonstrate to us is the importance of that mayoral leadership training, but also how do we capture and deliver that training before the councillor groups actually go to elect their mayor. We did see in the Whittlesea, the Commissioner of Inquiry reporting to Whittlesea, a recommendation that the election, particularly in that first term of the first mayor, be put back. I'm not sure where that's at in terms of the recommendations. Maybe, Tony, you have some more insight into that.
Yeah. So I think that firstly, I think that when you apply for a job or a promotion, there's often a position description, and so the people evaluating the candidates look at, is Kathryn the candidate and Tony the candidate? Have they got the attributes to meet this position description? And also, I guess when you make the application yourself, you think, am I up for this? And the Local Government Act has a section that says, this is what the mayor's role is and the mayor's powers, if you like. But I think that more expanded position description is of some value, even if it's not doesn't have some legal effect, but just for councillors to consider in their own council when they're thinking, should I run for mayor? Who should I choose? I can see some real value around that. Because we have seen people, Whittlesea's an example of someone who was elected mayor and then attempting to work a full-time demanding job, a school teacher, and it didn't come off. I really think that I think what we need more of are councillors who are willing to say, I haven't got the time to be mayor, or I haven't got yet, or currently the attributes to be mayor, and others saying, I might be as politically aligned or as on the same page on every policy approach as this colleague of mine, but I think that they would be the best person to be the mayor. They're the best spokesperson for council. They're the best chair of meetings. They're best at jumping in and mediating when there are issues between colleagues before they escalate. So they're the sort of attributes that I'd love to see in a position description.
And I assume that position description wouldn't say the next mayor needs to be the one whose turn it is, Tony or Kathryn.
That's right. Or serve the longest.
I'm being a bit facetious. Kathryn.
No, look, I was just going to say that I something in the back of my mind was that a council did try to introduce some position descriptions.
Yes.
Not quite sure
We've had
how
two
successful.
actually.
Yeah.
Well, there's been two, Hobson's Bay and I think Kingston, where monitors in place where they've attempted to bring in those documents, and it's been met with some resistance, it's fair to say. Tony, I'm also, while you were talking there, reminded that I think in the Arbiter's report this week at Whittlesea, there's a bit of criticism of the council, the group of councillors, for not doing enough due diligence in that initial decision to appoint a mayor. So that sort of goes to your point about all parties, I think, being prepared to put the right person in that role and the right people to be prepared to take them on.
Yeah. It's I mean, there's a reality to this where, often what occurs is that, before the formal meeting to appoint the mayor, there's a bit of, someone puts their hand up and ring up their colleagues and saying, I want to be the mayor, will you support me? And those sorts of things. And I do think perhaps having a more open conversation about the attributes of the individual, which isn't a criticism of the people who don't assume that role. And we look at the Parliament, for example, and we've got some really effective performers who probably wouldn't make a great Prime Minister, but they can be very effective performers in the Parliament. And so I think it's just picking the right individuals to perform those roles.
They do say it's an ill wind that blows no good. I just want to make the point that given the change at Alpine and the change at Cardinia, we now have two female mayors that have stepped in both of those cases. One is an acting. Kathryn, I'm not sure if you're aware, that means we have currently, as we speak, 35 female mayors in Victoria, noting that one of those councils is under administration, but that works out at 44.3% by my calculation, which I think must be a record. What do you think, Kathryn?
Oh gosh, it must be close, Chris, but you've put me on notice. You've put me on the spot. I would not like to definitively say that it is a record. So let's, I'll take that on notice and we can make some commentary about that at another time.
It feels like it though, doesn't it? I can't, it doesn't feel like to me we've had a situation where 35 female mayors have been in office around the state.
We were getting close to that sort of number, I think, following the 2020 elections, but it'd be interesting exercise to go back and have a look at that. Yeah,
absolutely. What else do we think might be a factor next year other than state elections? Obviously, strong advocacy needed from councils on their various platforms. Financial sustainability, notwithstanding the ESVF levy, is still going to be a very strong issue for councils, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think, councils are getting their head around year 2 council professional development requirements now. In fact, we've already got a number of councils approaching us to assist with that. So that's front of mind for councillors and also councils, because that training is mandatory across the full term. It is anticipated that there'll be some sort of review of that and what that might look like into the future. But I don't see the requirements lessening on the back of the PAYAC report, the Parliamentary Accounts and Estimate Committee report into fraud and corruption in local government, where strong recommendations came through from that committee on the need to strengthen training for councillors. And it was pleasing to see that the VLGA's evidence presented at that hearing and also in writing was referenced quite a number of times throughout that report.
Excellent. Tony, any thoughts on what you think will be front and centre other than the things we've already talked about?
Yeah, well, I think I don't want to put a downer on it, but I think that as we look forwards, I don't think there's going to be any real financial improvement for councils. I think that whoever is elected in November 26, there's going to be some massive belt tightening, I would think, in the state in terms of, recovering a budget deficit position. We'll either have a new administration come in who like, I mean, when we saw that, in the 1990s, we saw, we saw lots of levies and not a lot of money available. Or I think we'll see budget repair from both major parties, whoever's in government at a state level. And I think, what does that mean for LGAs? I think there's less largesse to go around. Does that mean at the same time that there's some freeing up of controls on on rates? Probably not. So I think that we're in for a tough time financially in the state for the next couple of years, I would think.
All right, it's a shame to finish it on a downer. Have either of you got a positive to look forward to?
Oh, look, if I could just say, we've just completed the second Victorian councillor census. So we're in the process, or when I say we, Kudos Research, who are doing that independently of the VLGA to ensure, the rigour and also the anonymity of those who've responded. We had 330 councillors respond to that. So that's over 50% of all councillors who would have been eligible or invited to complete the census, which is an excellent result for a census. So I believe when the team spoke to Kudos Research recently, there were over 35 pages of qualitative comments, additional comments that councillors took the time to add into, their responses, which again is an indication of the value of undertaking this census, particularly annually across this term. So we have a longitudinal study. We can look at the patterns, see the experiences of councillors from, ending one council term into another across the 4 years. What is it? What are their challenges? What are they enjoying? And what can we do to support them better? So really looking forward to launching officially the results of that census early next year, most likely in March, and then developing some initiatives that will further strengthen the supports we already have in place for councillors.
That is exciting and something to look forward to. And I imagine for you, Tony, it's a hope for a better performance from your football team next year.
There is that. They've got almighty Blues, but look, there's I think that whilst we often dwell on some of the negatives and civility, and we talked about financial challenges for councils, but councils are there stepping in whenever there are significant issues impacting their communities. I think more so than other levels of government, and we saw a tragedy this week in Bondi in Sydney, and the local Waverley Council is very much involved in dealing with the local community there, and we've seen that with floods and fires and any traumas in the community, and the value of local government is just becomes really apparent in those circumstances. And there's a lot of good work going on in across those 79 municipalities.
Absolutely, I would agree with that, Tony. And we saw it during COVID as well. We can't diminish the important role that local government has but not only during the good times, but even more so during times like this.
I think that's good to end on. Thank you, Kathryn, for your contributions and your support for VLGA Connect, which goes back to those early dark days of COVID when we started this little experiment on YouTube.
But if I could just say on behalf of the VLGA, thank you so much for hosting this program on our behalf, and also Tony for your sponsorship, support and contribution. This is, in terms of our suite of offers to the sector, and not only within Victoria, but nationally and also internationally, a highly regarded program. And I thank you both for your contribution.
It's a great
You're
to
very
be
welcome.
involved, and Chris carries the show with his great hosting.
Well, we will take a little break now and be back in the first week of February after Australia Day and the tennis. Thanks again there to Kathryn, Arndt and Tony Raunic for joining me on the show today. Now, we're not quite done yet. We have one final instalment for you now in our Meet the VLGA Board series. It's time to wrap up our Meet the Board series from the VLGA, and I'm delighted to have with us the other independent member of the board, Mike Blake, who's been on the board for, I think, a couple of years now. Mike, how are you going?
Yes, I'm in the third year of my membership of the board. Yeah.
Good to meet you, and welcome onto the show. Tell us why you've put your hand up to be part of the VLGA board in particular.
So I have two main reasons. I've had an interest in local government for a long time. In my audit world, I was auditing local government in Zimbabwe before I came to Australia, and I audited 5 major councils in metropolitan Perth when I migrated to Perth. And then when moving to Tasmania in my role as the Auditor General, I took a particular interest in auditing local government because we had to audit the 29 councils. Um, and I can talk more about that later. But so that was, I was interested in local government. I'm interested in governance generally. I'm a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and I've done a lot of training to improve and understand what that's all about in a general sense.
Yeah.
I also wanted to spread my wings a bit. So I've been on international boards, I've been on national boards, and when those came to an end around about 2021, I started looking about what I could do outside Tasmania, and this opportunity came up. So I was keen to engage in Victoria rather than just focus always on Tasmania.
Yeah, your journey is fascinating. Born in Johannesburg, I believe, grew up in Zimbabwe. At what point did you move from Africa to, I think you said Perth was where you came into Australia?
Yeah, so we moved in '89. I had 3 young children living with me in a city called Bulawayo with me and my wife, and they were 6, 5, and 2 when we migrated. And we saw no future for them in that part of the world. And my wife, very sensibly, it was her decision. She persuaded me we should move to Australia. We had a good look at Australia in '88 and decided where we wanted to go, and Perth was our choice. And I was very fortunate in that I was offered a position with the same firm I was working with in Zimbabwe, and that made moving that much easier.
And that was with your audit discipline. Had you been exposed to local government by that point at all?
Yeah, I had. So I audited the local government council of Wangi, which is previously Wanki, which is a game reserve in Zimbabwe, and I
Right.
audited the council that was in that area. So that was the first one in that part of the world. And then moving to Perth, they saw I had a bit of local government knowledge, and they gave me the 5 councils that I audited, including City of Perth, for example, City of Wanneroo, and a couple of others that I then specialised in local government.
Yeah, some of the bigger ones there by the sounds of it. How transferable was that experience, that knowledge from what you picked up in Africa to Australia? Was it a neat swap or a big learning curve?
Yeah, look, so Zimbabwe was by that time going through quite a difficult war period, but the issues are similar. I mean, the councils auditing a council is not that difficult. Their revenue sources are pretty obvious. It's all about collecting rates and grants, and so that's not hard to audit. And most of their costs are salaries and then project type things like building roads and providing services to the community. So that was the same with the council I audited in Zimbabwe, and I didn't then find that a big change in Perth.
Yeah. So 12 years as the Auditor General in Tasmania. What sort of changes to the local government sector stand out for you during that period of time? Because I know Tasmania's been through a few attempts to really restructure local government, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. So the first real change happened long before I got there, which was in 1991 when they merged what was then 49 councils into 29. And so I can't tell you what the motivations were or what the results of all of that were at the time. But when I took on the role in 2004, there were 29 councils spread across the whole state. And I found that really helpful in terms of my moving around the state, getting to know all of my clients because I wanted to meet them all face to face. So it's an ideal way to get to know the state as a whole through the local government lens.
Mm.
The sort of changes we made, though, were to identify how to assess financial sustainability of councils, bearing in mind that some of them are very, very small in Tasmanian context, very small, and even the bigger ones are not that big when it comes to comparing it, for example, with some of the mainland states. But so we developed a series of indicators to try and work out whether we thought those councils were financially sustainable or not.
Yeah, and more recently, there's been a piece of reform work, which I think ended up with the decision of the government not to force any amalgamations, but voluntary amalgamations would be welcomed. None have happened yet, but do you think that needs to happen based on your view of the sustainability of those councils?
Well, I think something needs to happen. There's been, as you say, a number of reviews. One by Saul Eslake, a very well-known economist here, which sat on the shelf and nobody took any notice of. Well, that's unfair. They just didn't make any decisions at the time.
Yeah.
And there's been a number of reviews since then, including the one that you just referred to, which is more recent, which recommended some action was needed. So I'd love to go back to see what happened in 91 to see what the motivation was and how they went about it, because I'm sensing here a lack of determination by government to actually, I think, make the hard call. And therefore, let councils make the decisions themselves, or let councils share services. So a number of councils here have voluntarily got together to share an IT service or some sort of back office service. But that doesn't really solve, I don't think, the fundamental problem is that they're just not big enough to be financially viable, I don't think.
Yeah. And Mike, you've also been involved with the Tasmanian Electoral Commission, I believe. Is that a current role that you still have?
Yeah, so I chair the commission. I've been doing that since 2017. I really did enjoy taking on that role. I waited for a couple of years after finishing my audit role before I started looking for work locally. And I find the Hare Clark system of voting in Tasmania, the preferential voting system, really valid in terms of getting the right outcomes. And then making sure that the election process is as fair as possible, making sure that every voter has the opportunity to vote to make sure our democracy works as it's intended. So yeah, I enjoy that role. I've got another couple of years to go before I finish it in
Right.
that space.
So thinking about sitting around the VLGA board table and what you bring to the mix of skills and knowledge around the board, what do you bring, do you think, from your time as an Auditor General in and auditing councils in multiple states, as well as your Electoral Commission role? What do you think you bring to Victoria, and where do you see opportunities, perhaps?
Maybe I'll answer that in two ways. So what I bring to the organisation itself. So because of my accounting background, I do bring an ability to understand our own financial situation and what we can do to improve that or make sure we continue to lead the way in terms of financial viability as a little organisation. And my audit background helps me then to make sure we've got the right controls in place and working with our own auditor to make sure that those systems work. I've also got an understanding of risk and governance, so I can make sure that the risk frameworks that we've gotten working with our governance committee, we can make sure we manage our own risk, and how do I contribute to that, and how do we make sure that our own constitution is fit for purpose in terms of making sure we govern ourselves effectively.
Hmm.
So that's at an organizational level. At a broader governance council level, I suppose I can bring some understanding of what happens in Tasmania and some of the things that have gone badly in terms of, we've had a few councils that have been stood down and administrators put in, and why did that happen and what caused it. I mean, our system is not the same as Victoria, but at least some of my understanding of what's happened here might be helpful.
Yeah, a lot of the issues are the same, aren't they? Right around the country, particularly some of those cultural issues you've touched on there. Every state
Yeah.
seems to be dealing with that. No one's got the perfect answer to it yet, but I think the VLGA is clearly very lucky to have someone with your mix of skills bringing that perspective to the board table.
Yeah, look, thank you for that. And it's, I suppose I've been impressed by the work that the VLGA does do in this governance training, working with mayors, the sort of interviews that you do to try and highlight what the issues are and then perhaps learn from those. And the fact that we've got 6 or 7 elected members on our council who are, currently working in local government as elected members helps to understand where they come from and how they can contribute. Well, but as you say, the issues are similar. How do you manage conflicts of interest? How do you manage people who voluntarily put their hands up to do this sort of work? It's a good thing that people are willing to do that. But then how do we make sure that they have the right training? Because they may not have come from a governance area at all. Most of them probably don't. And how do we protect them as well as make sure that they're doing the right thing for their respective councils?
Yes, an issue that's certainly been getting some attention in recent times. Mike, it's been great to meet you and to hear your perspective, and I hope it's not the last time we get to chat. I wish you all the best for the Christmas New Year period, and thank you for coming on VLGA Connect.
And thank you, Chris, and all the best to you and your family.
Well, we're fast approaching the finish line for VLGA Connect for this year and for this episode indeed. Don't forget, Fast Track is coming up early in 2026. It's in late Feb on the topic of incivility, and you can still access those early bird prices. Head to the VLGA website at vlga.org.au to secure your place and find out a bit more about Fast Track, the national one-day event from the VLGA next year. Well, thank you for watching and listening in ever-increasing numbers to VLGA Connect. It's been great to have your company throughout the year. We will be back, as I said before, in the first week of Feb. Until then, have a great festive season. Hope to see you all happy, safe and well in 2026. Bye for now.